Thank you, Phil. Appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to do this. I just want to start by saying I have really been blessed for years with my involvement with YBL. A former board member of mine introduced me to the ministry, and it's been a great ministry for a few years, being part of a discipleship group that meets at Alabama Power every Tuesday morning. And so I appreciate Phil. But you know, when you see Phil coming, you can tell he's getting ready to ask you something, you better watch out. So he does know I'm a big fan of history and a big fan of Birmingham. And I love to connect the dots through themes through Birmingham's history. And he gave me a really an interesting challenge. And I've given a lot of Birmingham history talks and presentations, but never one quite like this, in that not only am I going to talk about Birmingham's history, but, you know, what do we maybe as individuals glean or learn from the history of a city? Almost treating the city like it's a person and studying it like a character. And what are some things that we glean from our own city's history that we, you know, might learn from? But also then ultimately, what does our city need out of us now? So I'm going to kind of try to do a couple things and put that together for us, and I know that a couple of caveats or disclaimers. I'm trying to cover over 100 plus years of history in a very small amount of time, and so I'm going to go fast, and y'all just need to put your seatbelts on because we're going to drive pretty quick through Birmingham history. And so there's a real good chance that you may think, oh, he didn't talk enough about this, he didn't talk about that. I would agree with you. You're right. There's a lot that I can't deep dive into, and there's so much interesting stuff to deep dive into. But so this is going to be a real broad overview of that, and hopefully picking up some interesting and cool themes. Phil's right. I'm a native of the area. One other little wrinkle to it is I'm technically a Bessemer native. I grew up on the west side of town. My dad was a school teacher in Vestavia, so we'd go back and forth before 59 was finished. We would drive back and forth to school every day. And so I think that gave me maybe part of my love of this area's history is that I grew up on one side of town, went to school on another side of town, and I kind of saw different perspectives, didn't have a silo going, and it just kind of developed that way. So Birmingham, as we dive in, I do want to just explain what I do a little bit. I am the CEO of Rev Birmingham. We're a nonprofit organization that's mission is to create a vibrant commercial district, the revitalization of downtown or other certain neighborhood Main Street areas like the Avondale area and the Woodlawn area and others. And, why is this mission important? Well, certainly I believe in reinvestment in our city, but that these now more than ever, these vibrant business districts are important hubs of our cultural commerce, and they help us sell our city. If you're going to be a city who's a player in economic development in the world today, you've got to have a vibrant downtown and a city core. That's just a requirement. People don't just pick jobs anymore; they pick cities, and then they find a job. So that's very important to us, and we do this by helping what we call yaysayers. A lot of naysayers in the world. We like to find the yaysayers, the people who believe in Birmingham and are eager to be a part of the city's momentum, put together the pieces for great places. And that may be a group of neighborhood folks. It may be a developer who wants to do a multi-million-dollar project. This chart, which I won't spend too much time talking about, but these sort of 5 points maybe are the ways that we go about doing it. If we're focused on downtown, we're focused on organization, clean and safe, design and development, promotion, and business recruitment and growth. Keeping stakeholders organized about the vision, trying to promote and have a clean and safe environment, helping developers design and develop things, promoting the area, positive messages, and then doing business recruitment and retention. So I could do an entire slide just on or show on us, and that's all you're going to get of Rev Birmingham right there. But that's who we are. We are supported by the corporate community. We get some funding from the city of Birmingham and some program revenue from the things that we do. But let's talk about Birmingham now. In 1871, or prior to 1871, Jefferson County, Alabama was insignificant. It really didn't matter. It was a county that was not in the rich agricultural areas of the state, Black Belt areas sort of south or across the southern swath, nor the Tennessee Valley, the fertile Tennessee Valley up to the north. That's where all the economic power was. That's where all the political power was concentrated. But this state was recovering, as all the South was, from the Civil War. And there were some people thinking about new opportunities. So while we didn't have a lot going in Jefferson County prior to 1871, what we did have was potential. And that potential was in the ground, something God put there. He put the coal, iron ore, and limestone in close proximity. In fact, this area is unique in the world to have the concentrations of these three elements in close proximity to each other. And these happen to be the three things you need if you want an iron and steel industry. So in the industrial age, as it was, this was something of great value, but it had never really had something significant done with it. And so I divide Birmingham history into really 4 different major chunks of time. And we're going to talk right now about this upstart era. What happened in the beginning? And in the beginning, there was a vision to take this potential and do something with it and make money off of it. And guys like this, who I call the white guys with bow ties. This is J.T. Milner, Charles Lynn, James Powell, but there were others named Slauson, DeBartoleben, and others that really thought, we need a city, we need to make an investment, we need to promote this place, and we need to build an iron and steel industry. And so they took the vision, the political clout they had, pulled it together, and created the vision for a city, but they couldn't do it by themselves. They had to have other kinds of people. They had to have the working class. They had to have people who came to work in the mines and work in the steel mills and make all this product that was going to make money and build a big city out of it. So it wasn't just enough to have bow ties. You needed to have helmets. And so they were very ambitious, and they laid out a city. They took the middle of Jones Valley in where it's downtown today, and they thought very progressively about how you lay out a city. I know you can't make a lot of details out of this, but it's a grid pattern with block sizes that were very well thought about, organized around the railroad tracks going right through the middle of town. And that land around the railroad track was reserved for industry and people coming and going. But then the city would grow out from that middle, that river of steel that it was. And they laid out on the north side 3 major city parks, one of those being right here, which is now named for Charles Lynn, that man. But originally, anybody know what the original name of that park was? Originally, and you can see it on here if you could read it, it was called Capitol Park. And the reason it was called Capitol Park is because these guys were so ambitious that they just knew they were going to steal the state capitol from Montgomery and move it to Birmingham, and Birmingham was going to be the capital of Alabama. So they declared it. They said, this is where it's going to go, Capitol Park. Well, maybe a good thing that didn't happen, but that was the ambition. And that was the sort of style that they had. They declared it. And so they laid out a very orderly city that had the potential to really be one of the great industrial cities of the world, so great that they named it Birmingham, after what was probably the greatest industrial city in the UK at that time. That was where they were going. And they were so into promoting who they were that just within 40 years after starting, they really decided that they needed to put themselves on the map. And they hired this Italian sculptor to create a statue. It's the tallest cast iron statue in the world, and they sent him to the St. Louis World's Fair as the way of saying, look what we can do. We are Birmingham. And this guy got a lot of attention because over 7 million people over that year came to the St. Louis World's Fair. This was a heady time. They were pushing, and they were so ambitious, and they were building factories and foundries, and people were coming here from all over the world, literally. Even Charles Lynn himself was an immigrant from Finland originally. So, I mean, you had people coming here from all over the place to build this new city because there was opportunity here. So it was a time of great ambition, but there were some, challenges that were in the way we started. This is a picture of TCI, Tennessee Coal and Iron, in what we now call Inslee. This was the largest employer in Birmingham in the early part of the city's founding. A city which, by the way, had survived cholera epidemic. It had survived financial panics. It was a city that had had boom and bust, and it was a city that probably should have died many times. And this is a moment where it probably should have died, when TCI in 1907 got into financial trouble. And they were the largest employer. If they had gone down, the whole city probably would have gone down. And, or we might have never been any bigger than, say, Anniston or something like that. I mean, it would have taken us out. The federal government, who was trust busting at the time under President Roosevelt, allowed J.P. Morgan and U.S. Steel to buy TCI. And that gave U.S. Steel its foothold in Jefferson County. And this probably saved Birmingham. It stabilized our city. It allowed our city to attract even more investment into it, which is a good thing. But the thing that changed us with this is that at this point, the largest industry, the largest employer, the most influential driver of the economy was no longer located here. They were somewhere else. And that had a major impact on Birmingham. It saved us. It brought us more investment, but it meant that the drivers of the economy really weren't here. We were more in here for somebody else's purposes. So that's a big deal. The other big deal that happened around the end of this era is in relations with labor. There were a lot of folks who were working hard in the mines and in the coal mines, and there was a miners' strike in 1908. And these miners actually not only were striking and trying to get better conditions, but the thing that made it unique is that this was one of the few times that you saw people of different races coming together. Black miners and white miners were coming together. The city was growing. It was a southern city, and there were stark lines as where black people could be, where white people could be, and what they could be doing. But they came together in this strike. And because they came together in that way, the industry at the time asked the governor to call it a public health crisis. And under the auspices of a public health crisis, because you had black folks and white folks coming together, he squashed the strike and wiped it out. And so you saw this pattern of how to deal with labor issues and certainly race issues early in the life of the history of the city. And then the third important thing in this era, this is a picture of Woodlawn City Hall. This building actually still is in Woodlawn. If you want to go and you can see it, it does not have the cupola anymore. That was lost some long time ago, but that building is still there. And on the top of the door, it says City Hall. You may not know, but a lot of the neighborhoods that we call neighborhoods of the city today used to be their own cities. Ensley, Woodlawn, Avondale, Eastlake, North Birmingham. Those were all their own towns. And Birmingham was growing, and there was a movement to consolidate all of those cities into one big city. And by 1910, that occurred. An act of the legislature brought them together, and all these sort of disparate little towns came under the auspices of the city of Birmingham. And this was important because in 1900, Birmingham was the 14th largest city in the South. By 1910, we were the third. We had grown that much. And a lot of it was because the population was there and the cities came together. And you could officially say Birmingham is one of the mightiest cities of the Southeast. So this was a significant thing, this coming together. It is something that we have not really replicated since. And so it is, we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Who were the first two? If we were third, who was the first and second?
New Orleans and Atlanta were 1 and 2. Memphis was in the midst. So if you want to talk about like the top 4 communities that were really doing something in the South at the time, put Memphis, Birmingham, Atlanta, and New Orleans. So at the end of this era, so what do we kind of learn from this? And I told you we could relate it to ourselves. I mean, you look back and you see, what are those ingredients that you didn't put there, but God put there? What are those things that were kind of in the ground that somebody had to have a vision to try to use? And there's power of vision, right? You know, you cast a vision, you see the potential, and you don't just sort of think about it, but you do something about it. Our early city invested in infrastructure, it invested in the things that would help it grow. It was promoting itself, and sometimes we've got to do that ourselves, promote promote our own vision, promote ourselves. But the resilience, I think, is a really, really interesting thing for us. As a city, like I said, could have died, should have died many times in its beginnings. It shouldn't, in many ways, it shouldn't be here. But it had a resilience. There was something about it that just kept on going, even when there were cholera epidemics that basically cut the population in half, and when you had company failures and financial panics and that sort of thing. So I think another thing to think about as it relates to the TCI thing: who ultimately is your master? You have this master from somewhere else that was really dictating what was going on, and then of course the unfortunate power of racism, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and how we sometimes see people the ways that we shouldn't see them, but also then the power of unity. What happens when you can come together, and as opposed to being fractured? So I'm going to move into the next era. And this is the maturing era, 1910 to 1945. It's a big chunk of time. But this is where the city that we kind of know today starts to really take shape and take form. You see here the downtown skyline. Most of those buildings you see in this picture are still there today. They're in the old part of downtown. The person you see pictured here is, in his youth, George Ward. George Ward was the mayor of Birmingham. He was different from many of the leaders of Birmingham. He was not an industrialist. He was more of a finance guy. He was one of the founders of a company we came to know as Stern AG. He was a well-educated, world-traveled guy, and he had a vision for Birmingham that would clean it up. This was a Wild West town. It was a boom town. There were saloons and brothels and all kinds of stuff all over the place, and industries. It was dirty and filthy, and he thought we needed to be a more beautiful city. And so he tried to come in and clean it up some in his time. He was able to bring downtown into more of a modern downtown that you'd see with buildings like in Chicago and other places. And this was a time when the neighborhoods began to really take form, and you had wealthy neighborhoods and places like this and Forest Park, and then you had more, meager to modest, middle-class housing in the bungalows that you find in Avondale and Crestwood and West End. But then you also had really poor housing. You had basically company towns where the conditions were really bad. And these kinds of working-class conditions inspired some people. Inspired people like Carrie Tuggle. Carrie Tuggle founded an orphanage for African American boys who were orphans, and then a school. And today there's a school named after her. But she educated people that needed it because there was a need for that. Then you got people like this. You might know who this is. Brother Brian, Presbyterian minister, known for his compassion, known as someone who would give the coat off his back to someone, and he was a visible leader of how you got to give back, to the least of these in a city. And he was one of those early voices that said, we've got a problem around here, the way we treat people that don't look like white folks. He would say that out loud at a time when it wasn't really popular to do that. But it wasn't just social or ministers that were doing some very positive things during this time. You had business leaders like John J. Egan. You might know who that is. John Egan was a Sitco. That's right. He was a devout Christian who, according with his Christian beliefs, wanted to run a business by the golden rule. And so he started a foundry, co-started a foundry that we now know as a Sitco. But he did some interesting things like really focusing on worker safety programs. He had fair shifts. It didn't force people into a lot of overtime, and he had sick leave. He had constructed affordable housing and even clinics and health clinics for the people that worked there. And when he, right before he died, he had ended up back with control of all of the company, and he put it into a trust for his employees. And when he died, it became an employee-run company. And unlike many of those companies that came and went, this one is still around today. So there were a lot of people really being inspired to do things to help make conditions better for people in a really tough working class town. But we had a pretty major problem in our civic life, and that was the way we drew some pretty sharp lines and told people not to cross it. This is a map of Birmingham, probably around in the 20s. I know you can't make out a lot of details, but assume that downtown Birmingham is sort of right in the middle of this. This was a document used for public zoning and financing purposes, and so if you could read this closely, the way somebody had handwritten some things in, they had said there are areas that were best in the green. You had some still desirable, some, it says we're sort of deteriorating. Very clearly they call out Negro concentration. Like this is where the black people are supposed to be. And really divided the city up. Now Birmingham wasn't the only city doing this. There were cities all over the country that were using sort of a racial zoning and separating people out. But Birmingham was one of those that really, I'd say, perfected it. But what that created was a city within a city and a culture within a culture. It created leaders from within the African American community, like Dr. Gaston here, who saw that his people weren't getting their needs met. So he decided to fill those needs with things like funeral homes and banks and insurance companies. And he became the first African American millionaire in Birmingham. But it was also culture. Folks like Erskine Hawkins and Fess Watley here in the middle. Fess was a teacher at Parker High School, and he trained a lot of musicians in this new form called jazz, new music form. And he was so well known to be such a great teacher of that whenever some of these big bands like Duke Ellington or anybody else, whenever they needed a musician, he was one of the people they'd call and say, who you got that can play trombone or whatever, send me somebody. And so that culture developed and became a very, very strong culture, largely because this was also the time when many of the practices of our separation were really becoming laws. Like it was 1923 was the first time that it became law that an African American could not sit on the front of the bus or the streetcar, things like that. That was really becoming hardened. So by the end of this era, we hit the Great Depression. And Birmingham had been doing largely well, but by the time the Depression hit, we were doing terrible. We were one of the hardest hit, declared one of the hardest hit cities in America. And to exacerbate it, there had been an agricultural depression that actually started before the whole Great Depression. So a lot of people were moving from the country to Birmingham to look for work. And so you had this swelling of the population and all the jobs went away. And so you had a lot of social problems in our city. We became a target. The New Deal, when President Franklin Roosevelt came in, made a huge mark on our city. We were a city that the Works Progress Administration and other programs did a lot for. To name a few, remember Vulcan? He had been brought back from the St. Louis World's Fair and was sat in a field in pieces for a while, and then he ended up in the state fairgrounds, and then the Kiwanis Club and the New Deal programs put him on the top of the mountain where he is today. Housing, some of the bad housing conditions were addressed. This is Smithfield Court, the first housing project in the city. And then, anybody recognize this building? You know where it is? UAB, Jefferson Towers. This was built next to Hillman Hospital as sort of a replacement for Hillman Hospital to care for the indigent that needed help, needed a hospital. So that's where that came from. So in this era, if we're going back to our challenge of what does it look like, and what do we learn sort of as people here? Again, vision is important. You look at George Ward and his ability to move a city to being a more mature, better city, meeting needs. What are the needs around us that we see that need meeting sometimes, and we're able to stop and do that. And the alternative just hardcore capitalism that we see in John Egan that had kind of a golden rule led business. I think one of the things that we see, though, is that sometimes the evil in our lives we allow to deepen and get harder, and we don't address them, and it will come back to haunt us later. And then the risk of having all your eggs in one basket. This city had all its eggs in the industry basket. When the Great Depression hit, we were in trouble. So without that diversification, that was a problem. So we're going to move into the really final big era right before we get to where we are today. So the change era, 1945 to 1999, again, a big chunk of time. But anybody remember this building or know this building? This was the old terminal station. This was, what was the grand temple of travel for Birmingham. And what's interesting to me about this picture is that after World War II, this looks like it's probably from the 1950s, things changed. And rail travel was no longer dominant. People were getting cars. They were free back from the war, and they were creating suburbs. And what's interesting about this picture to me is it almost looks like this poor old station, which if you look at it closely, is getting kind of worn. It's almost like the cars are choking it. It's like this sort of says this is what's going to be the future. This building, of course, no longer exists. By 1969, it had been demolished. But what was coming was the growth of the suburbs. And they were already in existence some, but you saw things like Eastwood Mall to begin to try to replace the downtown department stores. And you saw things like Mountain Brook Office Park, which began to say, hey, people don't have to work downtown. You can have an office somewhere else. And people were getting away from the dirtiness of the city. They were getting away from, and they were getting away from people that didn't look like each other. Didn't look like them. But remember that building? There's Jefferson Tower again. It was in the late 40s that the University of Alabama made a very critical decision and decided to put its surgical college here, which now has become UAB. It had grown to that point. That now is the largest employer, of course, in the state of Alabama. And it's such a driver of our economy. Trying to imagine Birmingham without UAB being what it is would be hard to do. So there were some very positive moves like that to begin to diversify and move out from the old iron and steel days. But we still had to confront our greatest sin. And we did that in front of the entire world in the 1960s when Dr. Martin Luther King was invited here by Fred Shuttlesworth to point out how deep and entrenched Birmingham's segregation and racism was as a way of getting attention for that cause. And, he was looking for a confrontation. Because we didn't want to change, we gave him one. And we're still, remembered for that. And as difficult and painful as that is, though, it really began to produce some positive change. Not just here, but across the country and across the world. So even with some of the tragedies of that time, the death of 4 little girls in a church bombing, some of the people that were injured with dogs and hoses, it began to galvanize people to say, we really do have to change now. We can't keep up, and we can't keep doing this. And it brought a change in leadership that through the 60s and 70s eventually gave way in 1979 to the first African-American mayor of the city, Mayor Richard Arrington, who was the mayor for the next 20 years. Richard Arrington was elected because of a police brutality issue of Benita Carter, or a young woman who was shot during an incident in front of a convenience store, and that galvanized not just the black community in the city, but many of the more moderate whites to say we need different kind of leadership. And so he oversaw really, I think, the end of the Birmingham that was. His time in office, you saw a lot of the old industrial powers really go away. You saw the rise of different kinds of industries. You also saw a lot more of the loss of the city's population. A lot of white flight followed by black flight. The city in 1960, internal to the city was around 300,000 plus people, and today it's about 208,000 people. It's lost a significant chunk of its population in the middle. And I'm not going to dive a lot more into what happened during his time, except to say that there were efforts to sort of try to turn things around, but ultimately, how history gives us some of those really interesting, kind of juicy little moments, like, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were kind of political rivals, eventually became friends, founding fathers. They died on the same day. Anybody know what day they died? July the 4th. They died on Independence Day. These 2 founding fathers in 1826. I think that's just fun. Ironically, Mayor Arrington, who kind of, I think, ultimately oversaw this change of this city, that was already happening even before him, kind of coming to a close in 1999 when he finally resigned and stepped down and was no longer the mayor. That's the same time that the statue of Vulcan had deteriorated so much that he had to be taken apart and taken down off of his pedestal. This symbol of this mighty industrial city had deteriorated so badly he had to come down. And there he is getting carted off in trucks to go down to Robinson Iron and get recast. But I think that's sort of an interesting story. That sort of seems to me like an end of an era right there in Birmingham history. So we reached the new millennium. But before we reach the new millennium, what do we see in change? And I think just a couple of things. How we resist or cling to the bad things in our lives sometimes, really, they come through these major moments of crisis. Sometimes we got to get rid of the sin in our lives, and we need God's help, of course, to do that. But sometimes resisting change just makes it harder or makes it worse. You're either going to dig into a bad thing, or you're going to use God's help and God's power to help get you out of that. And of course, the other thing is sometimes what you started out being may not be what you are always. If you started out as Birmingham as an industrial city, at some point you can't be that anymore, and you got to look at change. So in our final few minutes, where are we now? 2000 and up. I feel like at the beginning of the millennium, Birmingham was one of the cities was kind of like, well, who are we really? What are we? We're not that old industrial city anymore. What are we going to be? We got a lot of banks, but what's going on? And you began to see ideas about a different kind of city emerging. This was from a picture from the 2004 master plan for downtown. One of the ideas was to take this idea that had been floating around called Railroad Park and take this old industrial land in the middle and let's just, it was set aside for industry and let's turn it into something nice for people. And it's an idea that actually happened. And it became what we know today as Railroad Park, which is one of the most transformative pieces of public works, I think, in the modern era anywhere. It has inspired a lot of development, but not just that. It's the one place, if you go there, you'll see people of all walks of life there at any time. And it feels like this place that everybody can own. We don't have to sort of say that's mine or that's yours. And that's been an incredible transformation for us. It attracted the Barons to come back downtown. And 600,000 people a year now experiencing downtown in a different way that they may not have before. What you see, with Red Mountain Park, taking again all those old mines and turning them into a place for people and the trails. And then I think Phil mentioned the bike share system. I mean, the things like this, we began to go from a city where we just work to a place that, we don't have to leave. We don't have to go to the beach or go to New Orleans or, go somewhere else to have a good time. We can enjoy our city. We've got a city that's got a lot to enjoy. And of course, the food. I mean, we've now transformed into this incredible food city, which is a great attraction for us. And it's different kinds of food and different kinds of people. And so, I know you can't read all of these, but you see headlines like Birmingham's bid to become the Southern Silicon Valley. That question of who are we? What are we becoming? Where are we going? What are the assets that we now have? We have a downtown that's resurging around entertainment, people living downtown. We have people that are working downtown, and we have, you see this is the Shift brand. You see this is one of those great innovation technology companies that our city, with its assets, has the potential to really grow. So again, just like the ingredients of iron ore, coal, and limestone, what are the ingredients we have? And really, probably the best one we have is our people. Very talented people that can help grow our city forward. People that are committed not just to what they're doing in their companies, but they really are committed to the city. And I think that's one of the 20 years of me doing this work, I've seen a major change in the attitude of people and the belief of people in this city, especially people that are younger than me. They are fired up about it in a way that was not true when I was growing up. And it is exciting to see that. And it's amazing what you can do when people want to come together, remove barriers, and move forward and build a great city. And of course, ultimately we do it for these folks, right? These kids that we want to grow up and end up wanting to come back to Birmingham or live here in Birmingham. I think the reinvention of our city and belief are these things that we can take from our modern era. How do we just not give up on our city, but reinvent? How do we reinvent ourselves at times? And how do we just believe, just have faith that we have still got a lot in us and a lot to do and a lot to contribute? What does Birmingham need out of all of us today? I think it needs more of that belief. I think our city needs a lot more of unity, coming together, overcoming our fractured nature and our fractured metropolis that we are. I believe that we need people with capital to invest in it and see ways that that capital can invest in their growth, because we're a city that still is plagued by 1907 when U.S. Steel bought TCI. We grow companies and somebody comes along and gets them. Shift was a great example of that. In 4 years, they grew this company and Target came in and got them. And that's a wonderful thing. We can grow great businesses, but that's a risk for us. And so we just clearly have to keep growing those and investing in people so that they can grow businesses and give them what they need. Other than that, I think that we always are going to need to just give back to our communities. And I can say this in a ministry setting: we definitely need to look to the Lord and see what His plan is for our city. He's used this city in an incredible way, not only to help a lot of people and give people jobs and opportunity, but what we look back at maybe a painful thing has been used for good, not only for us, but for the world. We're a city where I think the world learned a lot about what needed to be set right and about justice, and we need to look and see what does God want more out of Birmingham. So I know I've gone on a long time, and I'll stop with that. I'm happy. I don't know how much time we've got, Phil, but I'll be happy to dialogue and have any questions. I saved all the sort of facts and figures about downtown investment and all that. I could do that if you want me to do that, but I thought we were talking more stories today. So.
Any questions?
First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. Could you address just briefly the impact of the church throughout all of this period? I mean, it seems like there were failures on the level of the church too during some of these times. But recently, from my perspective, there's been a lot of new churches formed and seem to be having a tremendous impact.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The impact of the church during all this time. Obviously, we've talked about ministry leaders already. We've talked about Brother Brian. We talked about a business leader who's a Christian. Clearly, the church has had many positive impacts at this time, but you can also point to, or maybe collective failures, where sometimes our society norms, we sort of justify, to ourselves and don't step out of those and do things. I was talking one time. I'm a former Baptist. I grew up Baptist, and for a few years I was a part of a startup church in the city called Redeemer Community Church, and now I'm at the Church of the Advent, at the cathedral downtown. So I've gone from Baptist to nothing but Episcopalian. Don't ask me to explain that, but we are. I think we're blessed that now there are a lot of people that see it very much as a component of ministry and spiritual life and church life to make sure that the city that you're in is being redeemed as well by God. And I think that's a great. I'm very attracted to that. As a mission, one of the things that attracted us to Redeemer Community Church and then to the Advent. It's one of those things that the Advent says is one of its hearts. So, a heart for the city of Birmingham. So, I think that we're seeing now a much more of a focus on how the church helps to revitalize the city, and I think it's a good focus. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question, sir. I see where they're saying that population-wise, Huntsville is projected to be the largest city in Alabama in a few years, and they have the FBI up there, they got Mazda, Toyota, and we got all kinds of things happening up there. How do you? Are we competing with? Obviously, we're competing with Huntsville, and we feel to be a great city in number one. But is that important? How do we compete with Huntsville, the FBI, and everybody else?
There's definitely this sense that Huntsville has all the momentum. I think that one of the things you got to remember about Huntsville is that even, going back to our sort of fractured nature, I mean, we've got 36 different governments in Jefferson County. The city of Birmingham is threatened with being smaller than Huntsville, but the metro area of Birmingham dwarfs Huntsville. And it dwarfs Mobile. You basically can add up Montgomery and Mobile and Huntsville together. You just about make Birmingham, as a metro. So if we were really together as a community, as a metro area, I mean, we're still the most significant and powerful, economic bloc and all in the state. Now, that doesn't mean don't learn that you do have competition, and we have a lot more job growth going on now in Birmingham. It was slow for a long time. After the Great Recession, we lost 45,000 jobs, and we didn't bounce back very quickly. We're only just now getting back to the same numbers of employment as we had pre-recession. And some of those jobs are different jobs than they were before. So we have to be doing. That's why I say we've got to be creating business startups and opportunities for that growth to happen. Am I worried about Huntsville or something? To the degree that you can, maybe, but I'm really more worried about if we just do what we need to do, I'm not that worried about it. I do wish the urban population would grow more. I think the fact that it has basically leveled off is a testament to the fact that downtown is growing and a number of other close-in neighborhoods are growing, but there are a lot of issues in the other neighborhoods that have got to be addressed, and we could talk a lot about that. But I think Birmingham is still the most powerful economic engine in Alabama, even with what is going on in Huntsville. Yes, sir.
Do you see any resurgence or any potential for bringing back the idea of consolidating city-county government? Birmingham, Nashville's growth, Jacksonville's growth, and Charlotte, Mecklenburg are all because they have a consolidated government. They don't have a fractured government that we have. That was a determination in the early 70s that was shot down because of racial issues. Is that still a prohibited thing for us to have a consolidated government?
There's no doubt that is a challenge for us. I mean, you name all the cities around us that have grown, that's an obstacle that they don't have. And it's not that, like, Nashville consolidated in the 60s, well, they've only just now really taken off, so it's not like it was the thing that did everything for them, but certainly it's not an obstacle for them anymore. Once the other ingredients got in the right place, and my friends in Nashville will tell you that the one thing that really they're all on the same page largely. And that doesn't mean they don't have disagreements, but for the big things, they're all in agreement and they go after them. And that is definitely something that we're not quite there in Birmingham. So it would matter a lot. And if you ask a lot of particularly the younger people, I mean, there's this real desire to see greater metro cooperation. I mean, it's like the younger generation recognizes that it's the thing that kind of holds us back. Do you ever read those top 40 under 40, things when the BBJ came out? This time it really jumped out at me when they asked me, what's your name, what's your hobby, and all that. What's the one thing you wish for Birmingham? I bet you at least a third, if not more, of them said, I wish we had more consolidated government. So it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. And there's more cooperation than there was.